In order to teach right and wrong, you have to teach from a position of authority. Parents must assert and exercise their authority. A friend is a peer. A friend cannot command. Lots of kids out there can be your kid's best friends, but none of them can do the job of the parent. To put it in a sentence, I was not successful. I learned that public schools are really not that interested in the data. They are political entities, and they're driven by politics. And they like everybody gets a trophy. It's politically correct. Indeed, in many public school boards, the notion of even using the word boys and girls will now get you canceled, because even using the term boys and girls reinforces the heteronormative binary, and that is reinforcing the patriarchy.
Probably by our current government, even saying words ladies and gentlemen will land you in prison.
As you just observed, an online community is not a community, any more than looking at a menu will satisfy your appetite. It's not the real thing. That may seem enlightened to some, but it's not. It's a dereliction of duty. It's profoundly unhuman.
I think there is little doubt in the mind of audience that the girls and the boys are in crisis. Different reasons, different symptoms, but they are both struggling. But before we actually get to the symptoms and solutions to these problems, are we seeing these issues because there has been a collapse of confidence in the way that we actually parent our children?
So is that the question? Okay.
Yes.
So absolutely. I wrote a book 9 years ago called The Collapse of Parenting, basically sharing my experience and observation as a family doctor, what I have seen. I've now been a medical doctor in the United States for 38 years, and I have seen a shift in the way that parents raise their kids. And of course, that's not just my observation. Diana Baumgren, the researcher who founded the field of modern parenting research, doing longitudinal cohort studies, watching children grow, found over her 50-year career that American parenting is becoming more permissive. And shortly before her death in 2018, she wrote about her concern that American parents are shifting away from being authoritative to being permissive. And not only the parents, but the researchers who study parenting, in their standards of what's good parenting, they're shifting their standards toward a more permissive style without any warrant in the evidence. So, indeed, parents are becoming more permissive, less sure of their authority. There's been so much talk about smartphones recently, and I advised a mom. I said to her, you need to take your daughter's phone at 9 o'clock at night, the very latest, and switch it off and keep it in your bedroom in the charger, which will be in the parents' bedroom, and let her have it back tomorrow morning. And mom said, I couldn't take her phone. She'd totally freak out. And her daughter's 12 years old. So that's one illustration of what I mean by the collapse of parenting. Parents who are unsure of their authority, reluctant to exercise their authority, and kids suffer as a result.
It's interesting. There is always this idea that I keep seeing in mainstream magazines about being your child's best friend. And it always gets me because it feels like the parents are trying to fit all sorts of roles for children whilst really failing to meet one of these roles, perhaps. And it is inadvertent. It's not like any parent sets off to screw their kids. So what's going on with this idea of being your child's best friend? And where do you think it actually came from? Did it come from research?
Yeah. I devote a big chunk of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, to addressing what should the relationship between the parent and the child be. And I devote a chapter called Joy in the new edition about the importance of doing fun things together with your kids. Things that you enjoy, that you want to teach your kid to enjoy. If you like to ski, teach your kid to ski. If you like to sail, as I do, I've taught my daughter to sail a boat, a catamaran. Do fun things together, but don't be confused. A friend is a peer. A friend cannot command. Lots of kids out there can be your kid's best friends, but none of them can do the job of the parent. So again, I'll give you an illustration of what I mean from my own experience as a family doctor. In my 38 years as a medical doctor, I've been involved in only a handful of cases of sexual assault. One of my patients, a patient of mine being assaulted. One case, I was an attending physician at Shady Grove Hospital in Rockville, Maryland. I got a phone call one night from the ER, not to admit a patient, not to consult on a patient, but a girl in my practice, a 15-year-old girl, was in the emergency room. She'd been a victim of sexual assault. And a forensic exam was being conducted, and the mom was very upset and had asked the ER to call me. And I came in to talk to Mom and sit with her. That was my role. And when I met her in the consultation room, it was just her and me. And I walked into the room, and she said, "I knew I shouldn't have let her go. I knew I shouldn't have let her go. It was a frat party at the college. She's 15 years old. I knew I shouldn't have let her go." And of course, you want to shake Mom and say, "Well, then why'd you let her go?" But I didn't say that because I knew the answer. She wants to be her daughter's best friend. And a friend cannot command. A friend cannot say, "I will not permit it." Only a parent can do that. And this parent had relinquished her role as a parent in order to be the best friend. And as a result, her daughter suffered grievous injury. I shared that story when I spoke to parents in Tampa, Florida. And after my talk, a mother came up to me and told me how her 14-year-old daughter had approached her and said, "Hey, guess what? We're all going to Cancun for spring break." And Mom looked at her calendar. She said, "Well, I can't get away that week. I'm busy." And her daughter said, "I didn't say you're going. We're going, me and all the girls." And Mom said, "Wait, you're going to Cancun, Mexico without any grown-ups? I don't think it's safe." And her daughter said, "Oh, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. We'll be safe. We'll have our phones. We'll stay together. No problem." And Mom said, "No, you're not going." And she told me her daughter exploded. Her daughter started screaming at her, saying, "I hate you. I hate you. You're going to totally ruin my whole life." And Mom said, "Well, to be honest, sometimes I'm not so fond of you either." She said, "But I'm your mother. And that's a job. Like any job, it has a job description. And item 1 in my job description is I have to keep you safe. And I know more than you do about the behavior of drunk young men. You're 14, but you could easily pass for 18. And I don't think a drunk 20-year-old man is going to ask for ID. You're not going. If you're doing the right thing as a parent, there will be time that your kid gets very angry at you and may say some things that are very hurtful. That's part of your job. Your job is to be the parent, not to be the best friend. That doesn't mean you don't have fun with your kid. You do have fun with your kid. As I said, I devote a chapter of my book to explaining you have fun with your kid in your role as a parent, teaching them to sail, teaching them to hike, teaching them to golf, if that's your thing. You are the parent, and you're having fun together with your kid, but you're not the friend. You have to be clear on that, because otherwise you put your kid at risk.
I think there is little doubt in the minds of people that, back in the old days, there were aspects of really authoritative parenting that perhaps went too far. Do you think that we got to where we are today to sort of try and fix that, to try and address those overreaches, and we just never stopped?
So Professor Baumrind, who I mentioned earlier, really addressed this question at great length and studied it over the 50 years of her career. How was parenting changing? So she asserted, again, in one of her essays shortly before her death, that American parents have become confused. They think you can be too hard, too soft, or just right. You want to be just right in the middle. And she said that's the wrong way to think about parenting. It's not, the ideal parent is not in the middle between being strict on one hand and being loving on the other hand. The ideal parent, she asserted, based on her 50 years of research, is both strict and loving. Many Americans think there's a tension between being strict and being loving, and they don't want to be too strict, they want to be more loving. But she said, whoa. You need to be both strict and loving. There's no contradiction there. Those are two different dimensions. You can be strict or permissive. You can be loving or not loving. Those are two different dimensions. She made that very clear. The best parent is both strict and loving, setting down the rules, enforcing the rules, but with love and concern and showing that love and concern and affection.
What are the sort of aspects that you think are actually stopping the parents from being that? Is it just down to the cultural messages, or is there something a bit more structural in the way we currently live family lives?
So the German sociologist Norbert Elias wrote an essay über den Veränderungen in europäischen Verhaltensstandards im 20. Jahrhundert, in which he explored how Europeans were changing in their view of authority. And he said that the story of the second half of the 20th century is the collapse of authority. And specifically, that parents no longer are sure of their authority. He coined the phrase Statusunsicherheit, which can be translated literally state uncertainty, but I translate it in The Collapse of Parenting, I translate it as role confusion. Parents today are uncomfortable saying, because I'm your mother, that's why. And this is part of a much larger cultural shift. And he's talking about Europe, but we see the same thing in the United States. 60 years ago, the great majority of Americans said you could trust the government. 60 years ago, if you were a priest in the Roman Catholic Church, that was a position of honor. I remember growing up outside Cleveland, Ohio, at the public golf course. If a priest arrived wearing his priestly garb, they would escort him to the front of the line because he was a priest, and that was a good thing to be. A Roman Catholic priest told me recently how he got on an elevator and a mother with a child clutched her child closer to her when he walked in because he's a Roman Catholic priest. The great majority of Americans now say you cannot trust the government. You cannot trust the church. You cannot trust priests. You cannot trust big corporations. And I don't have a problem with that. I'm not asking you to trust the government or to trust the church or to trust big corporations. But the parent-child relationship is different from any other. The parent has to teach the child right and wrong. No one else can do that. And in order to teach right and wrong, you must teach from a position of authority. If you're talking to your kid about not cheating on a test and you say, I don't think I would cheat because that's just not my thing, but hey, you do you, whatever floats your boat. Obviously, you're not teaching anything. In order to teach right and wrong, you have to teach from a position of authority. Parents must assert and exercise their authority in a culture that no longer respects authority. The notion of hierarchy, the notion of being in charge, now is labeled coercive and controlling, and it's a bad thing. Many American parents now believe in gentle parenting. Gentle parenting means you let the kid decide because the kid knows best what's best for the kid. Okay, well, that's psychotic. It's utterly deranged. It is detached from reality. Look, what is childhood for? Quite literally. A 4-year-old horse is a mature adult, and a horse is a bigger animal than a human. So the purpose of childhood can't just be biological maturation, because a horse, as I said, is a mature adult at 4 years of age, and a 4-year-old child has barely begun. Why? Humans are children or adolescents for more years than most animals live. Why? Why does it take so long in our species? We don't have to guess. We have scholars like Dr. Melvin Konner at Emory, who's devoted his career to addressing this question and comparing development in humans with development in other species. Wrote an 800-page monograph, Oxford University Press, titled The Evolution of Childhood, comparing development in our species with development in other species, especially higher primates like monkeys and chimpanzees. And he concludes that the point of a long childhood is enculturation, meaning the parents and the other grown-ups teaching the kid the rules of their culture. And I talk about this in my book, The Collapse of Parenting. And on the next page, I cite a longtime columnist for the New York Times, Jennifer Finney Boylan. She wrote a column about enlightened parenting, in which she asserts that enlightened parenting means, quote, setting your child free to discover for themselves their own right and wrong. And if in so doing your child becomes a stranger to you, then so be it, end quote. That may seem enlightened to some, but it's not. It's a dereliction of duty. It's profoundly unhuman. One of the things that makes us unique as a species is a 20-year childhood and adolescence. And the point of that, the reason for that, according to the scholars, is for the parents to teach the child right and wrong. If you follow the advice of the New York Times and gentle parenting and set the kid loose to discover for themselves their own right and wrong, and they have a device with internet access, what they'll discover is Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, Drake, Bruno Mars, mainstream pornography. You're setting them adrift. And the result is kids who are anxious and depressed because they've been set adrift by their uncertain parents in a toxic culture.
Mm. You mentioned Catholic priests there, and there is this interesting finding in the research that religion, especially following certain religions, does seem to have a protective element to the modern way of raising children. And as you were talking, the idea of authority and being able to distinguish between the right and wrong came really strong. And I wonder whether is it the case that religious parents are just thought to be more authoritative, or is it just that just by the sheer fact that the children are immersed in religion that does have the authority and the idea of right and wrong, that they alchemize it within them?
Yeah.
And is that the thing that offers some
so again,
sort
we
of
don't
protection?
need to guess. In the new edition of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, I share research by Brad Wilcox, professor at University of Virginia, who has studied exactly this question and has indeed found that the children of religious parents who attend church regularly, and that's a marker of, are they really engaged in the religious community? Conservative religious parents who attend church with their children on a regular basis, those kids are much less likely to be anxious and or depressed. Right now, this is the work of Brad Wilcox at the University of Virginia. There's been so much buzz recently about the rise in anxiety and depression, not only among American teens, but among teens in Canada, UK, Australia, etc., that many people feel that it's universal, but it's not. There has been no rise in anxiety and depression over the last 20 years among teens in Greece or among teens in Russia. Now, I'm not saying we should be Greek or Russian, and I'm not praising Greece or Russia, but Greece and Russia, in Greece you have the Greek Orthodox Church, in Russia you have the Russian Orthodox Church, and those communities are not yet detached from religion in the way that the United States, UK, and Australia are now utterly detached from religion as a culture. So, yeah, smartphones may be harmful, but I believe that they are harmful because they are spreading a toxic culture, the toxic American English-speaking culture of envy and resentment and normophobia, and I explain all of that at great length in the new edition. In what ways American culture is toxic. So it's not enough just to take the smartphone from your kid at nighttime, for sure, but you also have to connect them to a healthier culture. There's been so much talk about John Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. It's a mega bestseller, and it's an important book. But the message of that book is almost entirely negative. Take away the smartphone, lock down the social media. There's nothing positive. And the point I try to make in the new edition of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, is, you do have to limit, govern, and guide your kids' use of smartphones and social media. But you also have to offer a positive culture. You have to connect your kid to your culture, your grown-up culture, your community of people who share your values, who do fun things together. It's not enough to say no. You also have to say yes.
Offer them some sort of alternative to not latch on to, but to perhaps drive, to get part of that meaning, the community feel, I suppose. Like in the internet world, there is so much talk about communities, but it's never really communities. Mm-hmm. These are just groups of loosely connected people. By loosely connected, I mean interest in A, B, or C. But the actual palpable relationships are hardly ever there. And if
Well, and again, we have good research now that supports what you just said, and some of the most dramatic research came from the pandemic. So go back to March 2020. Everything gets locked down. All the schools are closed. Kids are at home. The New York Times ran 2 essays by parenting experts saying, hey, forget the limits on screens. Kids are stuck in their bedrooms. Let them spend all the time they want looking at screens because that's their only community, is their online community. So Jean Twenge, certainly our nation's leading researcher on the effects of social media on kids, did a study late in 2020 where she and her colleagues interviewed more than 1,000 teens coast to coast here in the United States. And they found that some teens were more depressed as a result of the pandemic, but other teens were actually less depressed. There was a bimodal response. Some teens were worse, some teens were better. Very few were unchanged as a result of the pandemic. She and her team discovered one question that you could ask an American teenager in the fall of 2020, which predicted without error whether that teen was doing better or doing worse since the lockdowns. And that one question was, as a result of the pandemic, have you been spending more time with your parents? Teens who said, yes, I have, were flourishing. They were doing great, hanging with their parents, going for walks with their parents, hiking with their parents, watching old movies with their parents, playing board games with their parents. They were having a great time. But in families that followed the advice of the New York Times, let your kid huddle in his room looking at screens and TikTok and Instagram and video games, those teens were doing much worse. Yeah, they're in their online communities, but as you just observed, an online community is not a community any more than looking at a menu will satisfy your appetite. It's not the real thing. We are humans. We're not robots. We're not computers. We need to breathe the same air as our friends. We need to be with them in the real world, not online. Online is a substitute, and it's not a good substitute. So again, this research and other studies like it show that teens, like all humans, need real community, real life community. Looking at a screen will not satisfy. Online communities are not communities.
I think it's such an interesting idea. You know, the social media is as transformative, I think, for us as the invention of the internet was. It took our sort of reputation management to another level. And it's almost like it hyper-focused on a very, very specific, evolved sort of aspect of us. But I've heard you talk at one of your other appearances about the differences between the different social media sort of channels, if you like. So briefly, let's dive into it, because social media at the end of the day is a tool. And just like other tools, it can be used for some good, but definitely comes with some caution of appropriate use.
Sure.
So
again, researchers who study social media basically talk about 3 generations of social media. First generation social media is like Facebook. It's about connecting you to your friends, finding out where your elementary school classmate is today. Second generation social media, like Instagram, is about connecting you not only to your friends, but to celebrities and influencers and seeing what they're up to. Third generation social media, TikTok is third generation. TikTok is very different. TikTok is not about connecting you to your elementary school classmates. When you sign up for TikTok, the first thing they want to know is, what do you like to watch? Tell me a little bit about what you like to watch. Okay, I'm going to show you some videos. And then the algorithm is watching you, and the algorithm is really good. And it's customizing what it's offering you. And at the end of an hour, you're seeing things you didn't even know were out there. And it's very common to hear teens say things like, TikTok knew I was gay before I did. TikTok knew I was trans before I did. And it can pull kids, especially girls, down a rabbit hole that leads them to anxiety and depression. So TikTok is uniquely toxic, and I think the evidence is very compelling. And Jean Twenge shares this view based on her research that no child under 18 should be on TikTok. You could make a good argument that grown-ups shouldn't be either, but certainly no child under 18 should be on TikTok.
And there is no such warning label for Facebook, for example.
Well, and of course, last year the Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Vivek Murthy, said that there should be, and that we need to change the law. The relevant law at this time is the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, passed in 1998. Facebook didn't come on board to 2004, and it is the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act that says you need to say that you're 13 in order to be on social media. There's no enforcement. And 40%, as Dr. Murthy pointed out last year, 40% of American 8 to 12-year-olds are on social media. All they have to do is say that they're 13, and bingo, there's no need for verification or parental consent. And so you've got 10-year-olds on TikTok, which we now know is immensely harmful. And Dr. Murthy, I think, was right to say, look, the legislators have to update the law. We need a new version of the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act. 13 is certainly too young. No child under 16 is the age that he suggested. No child under 16 should be on social media, and we need to put enforcement in. We have the tools to do this. It wouldn't be hard for the Silicon Valley corporations to put in real enforcement where you had to verify with a driver's license or other government-issued ID that you are indeed 16 or over. Yeah, I think that's all true. But look, parents, you can't wait for the United States Congress to do something, because that could take a very, very long time. Our politics are dysfunctional. But let's not talk about American politics. It's in the power of the parents right now to lock it down. And in my book, I talk about how you do that. You've got to install parental monitoring apps that have teeth, and I talk about how you do that. And parents are skeptical. They say, oh, come on, my kid's just going to Google, how do I get around parental controls on NetNanny? Well, I actually met with people who work in NetNanny, one of the parental monitoring apps that I recommend. There's about 20. And they told me that they have colleagues whose full-time job is to Google the phrase, how do I get around parental controls on NetNanny? And if they find that some kids found a hole, they do patch it, usually within a few hours, and your app will update. These apps are way better than nothing. And we can talk at length about how you ensure that your kid is not getting around them, burner phones, etc. But don't throw in the towel without even trying. You have to explain to your kid why the social media is harmful, but you also need to enforce it. And so I'm not going to allow you to be on social media until 16 years of age.
There are so many movements now, whether it is in the States or UK and Australia, to really start trying to change the culture, because I think the parents are very much realizing that the speed of technology development is just outpaces the development of legal structures around it by miles. So I don't think that anytime soon we will be actually able to rely on the government to sort of just, look after that aspect for us. And I think another thing that I've noticed that is very, very pernicious about the TikTok is it almost creates short attention span by just the sheer of what type of videos tend to do well. And then also just, I've seen young kids use it, and they don't use it like Twitter or YouTube, where you can actually find 3-hour conversations on a podcast, where people will literally sit there and watch it and listen to a 3-hour conversation. It's 10 seconds. It's minute.
Again, we do have good research that supports exactly the point you're making. Most popular videos on YouTube average about 8 minutes. Most popular videos on TikTok average about 40 seconds. So indeed, as the technology evolves, it's programming a shorter and shorter attention span.
Wow. Do we actually know, what's happening to the brains of these children? Are we talking about like rewiring? Is that something that can be fixed or remediated?
Well, John Haidt likes to use the word rewiring in his book, but John Haidt, with all due respect, is not a neuroscientist. And the actual neuroscientists have pushed back hard and said that he's out of his domain. And I think you have to be very cautious about invoking brain-based explanations, and I don't think we need to. I think it's quite sufficient to stay in the world of our actual experience and say, look, the most popular videos on TikTok are 40 seconds. They're programming a short attention span. You don't need to invoke MRI scans to support that claim. We've got very good evidence on that point. And the same is true of video games in somewhat of a counterintuitive way. So like RDR2 is one of the most popular video games, and it typically takes about 40 hours to complete your mission. However, we have, again, good research showing that boys who spend their free times playing video games more than 20 hours a week have attention spans that are much shorter than boys who don't play video games. And the video game is designed to be addictive, and the screen is constantly changing. There's always new things happening. Studying Spanish grammar from a textbook is boring by comparison. But in order to excel in school, you have to be able to study Spanish grammar from a textbook. And we also, again, have good research that I share in my book, Boys Adrift, showing that boys who are spending 20 hours a week playing video games are doing much less well in school. And there are several mechanisms by which that appears to be happening, and one of which is that video games make it harder to pay attention in the real world.
Why? Why is it that like those skills are not transferable? Because anyone that has seen a teenager on a video game, they can be glued to that game for 20 hours.
Yes.
And if they didn't need to like nip up for a pee and a drink and something to eat, they would sit for 20 hours glued to the screen.
But again, video games are carefully designed to be addictive that way. Excuse me. And if you're playing a first-person shooter game like Call of Duty, and you're a sniper and you're preparing to shoot that guy, but you've got to be aware of everything going on around you. That little wiggle in the top left-hand corner of the screen, that could be another sniper getting ready to shoot you. So you've got to be constantly aware of everything. You can't focus on just one thing, which is actually the opposite of the skill that you need in the classroom. If you're taking a test in the classroom and you're expected to write a short essay, and the kid next to you is making buzzing noises, and the boy on your right is chewing gum loudly, you've got to shut that out. You've got to block out everything else and focus. So, again, the researchers find that the skills needed for success in the classroom are kind of the opposite of the skills needed for success in many of these first-person video games, action video games. So it's really not surprising that boys who are spending 20 hours a week playing these games are doing less well in school.
It's ironic almost, because I think the video games give people the sense of competence without actually giving them a real life competence.
Mm-hmm. So again, that's the focus of my book, Boys Adrift. The desire to achieve and to impress others with your achievement is something all humans share. But we've got very good evidence showing that boys have that on average to a greater degree than girls do, that boys want to impress and amaze other people. Girls also have that drive, but for girls, a more important drive is to be liked by their peers. And I would assert, and I cite, Friedrich Nietzsche was really the first philosopher to say that, yeah, we all have these drives, but what drive is the most important drive? That defines your character. And Friedrich Nietzsche talked about der Wille zur Macht, the will to power. So the will to power is the desire to be in charge, to be in command. And we all have that. We all want to be in charge. We all want to be in command. But Friedrich Nietzsche said, yeah, but is that the most important drive for you? Uh, and for most girls and for most women, it's not. For most girls and most women, if they had to choose between being liked and having lots of friends versus being the boss and being in charge, most girls would say, I'd rather be liked. I don't want everyone to hate me because I'm the boss. But there are many boys who say, no, I want to be the boss. I don't care if anyone likes me. I want to command. Video games get that. So there was a commercial for PlayStation 4 a few years back that begins with the actor looking right into the camera and saying, who are you to be ordinary? You, whose name should be spoken in whispers, reverent tones. You should be worshipped. And then he jumps into this video game world. This promise that you can be master of the universe. The video games promise that, and they deliver on that promise. If you devote the time and the effort and the 40 hours, you will be master of the universe. And the video games are so well constructed. The leading video games, they invest hundreds of millions of dollars in making them utterly realistic and convincing with plot lines that pull you in. RDR2 taking place in this very weird era in American history, 1899, when the Wild West is transitioning to being a rule-governed jurisdiction with police, and you're an outlaw trying to navigate that. And you can choose. You can be the good guy, you can be the bad guy, and your choices have consequences. And it takes 40 hours. And one boy who completed it said it was so satisfying to complete that, to finish that. I felt I'd really achieved something. Well, in the real world, he's working a minimum wage job with no chance of improvement and living in his parents' home. And he's 29 years old. But he's perfectly content because he finds his sense of mastery and achievement in the online world. And that's a shame, because his real world potential is not being realized.
This is something that I can attest to personally. I've got a family member that works as a game tester, and what he's told me about that industry absolutely blew my mind. They've got offices that with staffed 24 hours a day, so they work 3 different shifts, and these guys and the girls play games all the time, not just to look for glitches and, some sort of issues within the actual graphic design or whatever, but they are constantly trying to answer question, did you feel like you wanted to stop? Did you feel like you couldn't stop? And if the certain games are not reaching certain amount of threshold, they go back to redesign them, to change something about the game structure to make it more addictive. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that entire industry, just imagining hundreds and hundreds of young people playing games 24 hours a day before that game even hits the market. I don't know, it feels a little bit like the people designing the games know what they are trying to achieve, and it's not necessarily for the betterment of users of their game. It's for the betterment of their bottom line and sales, I suppose.
Yeah.
It felt pernicious when I was hearing what his work is like.
And I do devote a chapter of my book, Boys Adrift. The title is Boys Adrift. The subtitle is The 5 Factors Driving the Growing Epidemic of Unmotivated Boys and Underachieving Young Men. And one of them certainly is video. One of those 5 factors is video games. And again, we've got good research documenting this point.
Okay, so let's turn to Boys Adrift. I am very interested in the crisis of masculinity and the culture sort of demonization of men. So what are the sort of the 5 major issues besides the video games for the boys? Because you do have some unique perspectives that I haven't heard anywhere else, even from the guests that I spoke to about the issue before.
Well, I begin by reminding parents that not so long ago, things were the other way around. I attended public schools in Ohio, kindergarten through grade 12. And I remember our high school honor ceremony where the graduating seniors who had achieved special distinction were honored and were up on the stage. It was all boys. It was in 1977. It was all boys. The editor of the school newspaper was a boy. The editor of the yearbook was a boy. The valedictorian was a boy. The editor of the poetry journal was a boy. They were all boys. And that, again, is well documented. It's not just my school. Myra and David Sadker were researchers who traveled around the United States in the 1970s and 80s, visiting classrooms, visiting schools, thousands of them nationwide. And they were very concerned because the boys were excelling and the girls were left behind. And they wrote a book published in 1995 called, the subtitle was How Schools Shortchange Girls. And again, they presented all their data, gathered in the 1980s primarily, showing that the great majority of the valedictorians were boys, the high achievers were all boys, girls were not called on, girls were not raising their hand. Reading that book now, it's like, whoa, it's like reading about the Roman Empire. It's so different from our experience today because things have flipped the other way. And now girls are much more likely than boys to be the valedictorian, to be earning the high marks, to be academic stars. This has happened in a comparatively short period of time. You know, in the whole span of human history, 30 years is a short period, but it has flipped completely. So much so that young people today don't have any memory of a different era. So when I visit schools, I often meet with the students. And when I meet with students, it's always question and answer. It's not a formal didactic presentation. So I was visiting a middle school, and I was speaking at the assembly to the students. And I said, all right, this next question is just for the boys. Gentlemen, I was in the hallway just now, and I saw the principal's honor roll, a list of students' names in the hallway. The highest achieving students. There were 22 names on that list, 19 girls and 3 boys. I'd like any of you boys, and just the boys, please, raise your hand and explain to me, why are there 19 girls but only 3 boys on the principal's honor roll? And several boys raised their hand, and I called on them. And each of the boys gave some variation on the answer, girls are smarter. Girls are smarter. Boys today believe this. It still comes as a shock to me because I grew up in a different era when the boys were the high achievers. But boys today have been raised in the era of girls rule, boys drool. Girls go to college to get more knowledge. Boys go to Jupiter to get more stupider. And indeed, all they have to do is observe. In the United States today, in every subject, in every grade, K through 12, girls now outperform boys, including math and science. Girls get better marks. So the boys look around, they see the girls are doing much better than they are from kindergarten on, and they conclude girls are smarter. And that fixed mindset of I'm dumb, girls are smarter has bad consequences. Where did it come from? Why are boys today so much less likely to be high achievers than their sisters? So that's the central question, a central question I'm trying to answer in my book, Boys Adrift. And I find that there are actually 5 different and unrelated factors that have together combined to create this phenomenon where boys are less motivated. The short answer to the question, why are boys doing less well than their sisters, is that boys today are less motivated than their fathers were 30 years ago. That is the correct answer. There's nothing hardwired about it. There's nothing about DNA or anything like that. Boys today are less motivated. But of course, that raises a second question. Why are boys less motivated? And that's really the question I'm trying to answer. Why is the average white, black, or Latino boy in the United States today less motivated to do well in school than his sister. Same family, same background. I can tell you so many families I have observed firsthand as a family doctor where the daughter's getting full marks, straight A's, and her brother is doing very poorly. Same home, same resources, same parents. Daughter is a star, and the boy couldn't care less. Couldn't care less. He's not motivated. And so many parents have said, he's smart. I know he could do well, but he just doesn't care. He doesn't apply himself. So what's going on and what can parents do about it? That's the focus of my book, Boys Adrift.
So this is like really interesting because we know, for example, that from the evolutionary point of view, and I've learned that from Joyce Benenson, men tend to go for the contest type of competition where, they compete publicly so they can get all the glory. So if this is sort of how men evolved essentially through centuries, like what is going on now in, for example, schools and education where we are successfully tempering that instinct?
Okay. So again, I list 5 factors. One of the 5 factors is changes in education. American education changed over the last 40 years. And one of the changes, there are 4 ways in which American education changed that I outlined. And one of those 4 changes is the one that you have just highlighted, the abolition of competitive formats. Today, in most American schools, public and private, everybody gets a trophy. But the problem with everybody gets a trophy is if everybody gets a trophy, then for many boys, a trophy isn't worth anything. One mom told me how her 2nd grade son came home from school in tears. So what happened was that the PE instructor, the phys ed instructor, had said there's going to be a race. A week from Tuesday, we're going to have a race. All the 2nd graders are going to race 4 times around the oval. And this boy took that very seriously and began training. And at recess and lunch, he would run around the oval preparing for the big race. And the big race came. And all 35 2nd graders lined up. And the instructor said, on your mark, get set, go. And this boy ran as hard and fast as he could. And he came in 2nd. And he was very proud of that. 2nd out of 35. Until the teacher gave everyone a 1st place ribbon, including the kid who hadn't even completed one oval, walked a few steps and sat down. He still got a 1st place ribbon. And the boy came home in tears of anger. He said, the teacher tricked us. He said it would be a race. I'm never going to run a race again. The abolition of competitive formats has the unintended result of disengaging some boys from not just PE, but school generally. So, and it's really not a good strategy. It doesn't benefit the girls. The abolition of competitive formats, it's very easy to reinstate competitive formats if schools see the problem. And I took a 5-year sabbatical from medical practice from 2008 to 2013. I spent my time visiting schools. I've visited now over 500 schools across the United States and worldwide, meeting with school leaders and school boards and elected trustees, trying to show them the data and persuade them of these zero-cost interventions you can make to re-engage the boys. To put it in a sentence, I was not successful. I learned that public schools are really not that interested in the data. They are political entities, and they're driven by politics. And they like everybody gets a trophy. It's politically correct. And to be concerned about boys, I was speaking to the elected trustees of the Toronto District School Board and showing them the data. The director, we would use the term superintendent in the United States, but the director of the Toronto board had given me all the data, the EQAO data from across the province, as well as the Toronto board data. And very compelling data showing that being a boy is a handicap in the classroom greater than being low income. You're better off being a low-income girl than an affluent boy. And that's true across North America as far as school achievement is concerned. And I said, here are some strategies that have been shown to work to re-engage the boys. And many of the trustees were openly hostile to me and to the director. And one of the trustees said, wait a second. 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are men. Most of the money is controlled by men. Most of the political leaders are men. So I don't really follow. Why are we supposed to be concerned about boys doing less well? They still run everything. Men still run everything. They still have most of the money and most of the power. I just don't see it. So unfortunately, this issue is politicized. And people who are left of center tend to push back very hard when you say that, hey, we need to be concerned about the boys. People who are left of center tend to be more concerned about girls. And so when I speak to school boards, I'll always say, look, girls are not the winners here. Girls are much more likely to be anxious and depressed, and they're not making progress in physics and computer science or engineering. We're not seeing a rise in the proportion of girls earning bachelor's degrees in those fields. And when you look at American universities, you find that now more than half, or almost half, not more than half, that was a mistake, almost half of the women earning degrees in computer science in American universities are not American women. They're women from Europe and Asia who are coming to this country to earn their bachelor's, their doctorates in computer science. They're not American women. We're not doing a good job of engaging and motivating American women in computer science, physics, and engineering. So I say, look, gender-aware instruction. The best way to get girls excited about computer science is different from the best way to get boys excited about computer science. We know this. We have very good studies on this point. The best way to get boys excited about creative writing and Emily Dickinson and Jane Eyre is different from the best way to get girls excited about creative writing and Emily Dickinson and Jane Eyre. We know this. We've got good research. Gender-aware instruction in the co-ed classroom can boost achievement for both girls and boys. That's the spiel that I was giving to the school boards. It was not successful. Indeed, in many public school boards, the notion of even using the word boys and girls will now get you canceled. Because even using the term boys and girls reinforces the heteronormative binary, and that is reinforcing the patriarchy, and that means you're a Republican, and therefore you are not welcome. Incidentally, I'm not a Republican. I'm a registered independent.
Yeah, well, I'm currently based in the UK, so very soon, probably by our current government, even saying words, ladies and gentlemen, will land you in prison, because that's essentially the direction that they're moving. But I think what gets me the most about, let's say that by demolishing competition in school, we wanted to improve it for the girls. And let's say that we've started demolishing that competition 20, 30 years ago. By now, even people that believe that they're doing it for the right reasons should have plenty of objective data and science showing that no matter how much we are damaging the boys in terms of creating environments for them to thrive or not thrive as we are doing, we are not actually improving the lives of the girls by doing that. So there is this massive dissidence there, it doesn't make sense what we're doing. So looking at the girls specifically, because what I actually love about your work is you've written 4 books about big issues in our time, and you've dived really deeply into each one of these issues. So let's just do a whistle-stop tour of issues that the girls are facing, because they are also not doing well, but they are not doing well for different reasons than the boys.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about a family in my own practice where the parents were very concerned about their son, who is 16 years old and totally basically failing Spanish and not doing well in his other courses, spends most of his free time playing video games. Very bright boy, but not working and not motivated. The parents are very concerned because he's on a very bad trajectory. He's not getting good marks, he's not going to get into a good university, etc. And they're very proud of their daughter, who is 14 and getting full marks, doing very well. But when I met with the daughter, it turns out she's very anxious. She has trouble getting to sleep, trouble staying asleep. She's secretly cutting herself with razor blades on her upper inner thigh where no one will see. Yeah, she's getting great marks, but she's very anxious. Both these kids have big issues. Her brother is having a great time. He's very happy as near as I can tell. He doesn't care about how he's doing in school. He gets a whole pizza and eats it while he's playing his video game. Daughter eats one slice of pizza and is consumed with remorse because she ate a slice of pizza and she's trying to lose weight. Both these kids have issues, but they have very different issues. Kids are struggling, girls are struggling, boys are struggling, but they're struggling with different issues. So I wrote a book called Girls on the Edge. And the title has several meanings, but one of the meanings that I intended is girls who look great, they're doing well, they've got lots of friends, and the parents think everything's going fine, but they're on the edge of a total meltdown collapse. And I've seen this firsthand of this girl who thought everything was great, and then one bad thing happens. She's very fragile, and she falls apart, and she's suicidal and doesn't want to go to school anymore. And I share some of these stories in the book. Why are girls today so fragile? Why are they so likely to be anxious and depressed? Social media is part of it, but it's only one of 4 different factors that I identify. Parents need to be aware of all the issues. Yeah, the social media is a problem, but you also have to, again, you can't just say no, you have to say yes. You have to connect your daughter to a healthy culture that's not about how you look or how many friends you have or how many likes you got on your TikTok post. It's about being connected to a grown-up, real-life community.
Mm. What would you say is the most pernicious aspect of our modern life that is the most damaging to the girls?
Well, I do think it's worth talking for a moment about just why social media is so toxic for 12, 14, 16-year-old girls. So girls are immersed in stories of other girls who, without much effort, become these TikTok influencers and superstars with millions of followers. And this girl looks at this influencer's video, and it's not that great. And this girl says, I can do better. I'm a better dancer. Everybody says so. I'm prettier. Everyone says so. And she puts all this effort into making that video and posts it, and it flops. Researchers tell us there's millions of young people who are trying to become influencers. There's more than 1 million TikTok influencers with more than 50,000 followers. 50,000 followers won't get you anything. It'll earn you a couple $100 a year. You've got to have millions of followers to be successful. And going from 50,000 to 1 million is very difficult. And you can put in all the time and all the money and all the energy, and it will not happen. And the result is girls who are envious and resentful, looking at other girls. Why her? Why not me? Life sucks. My life sucks. Very common theme on TikTok videos. My life sucks. And Julie Jargon, the parenting columnist for the Wall Street Journal, wrote a kind of tongue-in-cheek column for parents saying, hey, parents, get your daughters off social media and get them playing video games instead. Because the video game world promises you can be master of the universe, and it delivers on the promise. As I said earlier, if you devote that 40 hours in that video game, you will conquer. You will rule. But the world of social media does not deliver on its promise. Girls are immersed in these stories of other girls who become followers, influencers with millions of followers and earning hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year. And the appeal is that, hey, if I do that, if I go into that, I can also be a millionaire influencer. And it does not deliver. It doesn't happen. And you are depressed and envious and resentful. And again, in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, I say we need to teach our kids to be humble and grateful and content. And social media programs kids to be just the opposite, to broadcast themselves. It's the opposite of humility. It's the opposite of gratitude. It's, hey, look at me, look how great I am. And it leads to envy and resentment and frustration.
So would you then sort of point towards the social media being the sort of the biggest, the big bad wolf when it comes to like the thing that is causing the girls like the most
Well, there are four
anxiety,
factors. Four
or
factors.
is it just the fact that these four factors are playing
So,
off each other and
social media is
compound
one of
each
the four
other?
factors, but I never try to estimate which is the most important because, again, my work is always evidence-based, and we have no research that can allow us to say confidently which is more important, the social media or the breaking of bonds across generations. So another factor that I focus on is that 40 years ago, girls looked to their mother as their most important connection. Today, girls look to other girls their own age as their most important connection. And that breaking of bonds across generations, that girls are no longer connected to adult women, but are more connected to other girls their own age group, that's profoundly important. And I make no effort to determine which is more important because they're both very important and they reinforce each other. So girls are disconnected from their mothers and their mother's community, and instead they are immersed in this toxic social media culture. And those two factors work together synergistically to create a really toxic brew for girls. And I see no value in arguing about which is worse, the breaking of bonds across generations or social media. We need to do both. We need to restore bonds across generations, and we need to limit, govern, and guide kids' use of social media.
It's strange as you were talking like about like the examples for the girls. I was thinking, like, I was born in 87, and when I was growing up, to me the role models were some of my aunties, but most likely it was my older cousins that I was spending a lot of time with. Like, I literally worshipped the ground that some of them were walking on. And it wasn't like all of them, but I did have some cousins that I really, really looked up to. And it wasn't just the girls, there was also boys that I absolutely adored. So I think that the richness of those like real connections is just something that I don't think that we will ever be able to replicate
Well, but
without.
you can, and again, in really in all four of my books, I am sharing stories of real families in my own practice who have succeeded in restoring those bonds. Right now, you can do this. You can turn off the screens and connect kids to your community. It's not easy and it takes courage, but it can be done. It is being done.
Okay. So for the people that want to find out more about your work, like we've mentioned, you've actually written 4 books. There was one that we hardly touched on, which was on why gender matters.
Yes.
So we had why gender matters, Boys Adrift, Girls on the Edge, and the Collapse of Parenting. And you mentioned that you've actually just updating the Collapse of Parenting, and very soon there will be a new
October
updated
1.
version.
Yep. And I got to read the audiobook as well, which was great fun. That's a first.
Okay. So when is the new version coming out, and
October
where
1.
can people... Okay, October the 1st. And then where can people find you online and follow your work?
So I hope you'll come to my website, Leonard Sax, LeonardSax.com, and then you can be in touch with me and you can find out more about me and see when I'm speaking in your area.
Lovely. Thank you very much for your time. And ladies and gentlemen, I give you Leonard Sax.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Wisdom Rebellion. Before you go, if you enjoyed the conversation, please consider subscribing. It massively helps with keeping the show on the road so we can all build a wiser world together. And if you loved this video, you will also love this one. I'll see you there.